First, wow, what a great morning. It was fantastic. A couple of, a question for Bob. Do you see, so it was a little pessimistic, I thought, on the future of government data and sort of our status of where we stand. And do you see that improving in the next couple of years or not improving?
I think my thoughts on this are dependent on what we do over the sort of the next 3 to 5 years, I think, on these decisions of blending. So let me do good news and bad news. The good news is, I think, there's several groups at the Census Bureau, my old place, that are very actively working this problem. And there's several groups at the Bureau of Economic Analysis that are trying to bring in private sector data in ways that would facilitate things. There's certain legal constraints on how far that can go. So one of the difficult problems, say, of the Census Bureau is they're quite happy to accept data in, micro data in, but once it's behind their firewalls, it never goes out again. So it's hard. That's not a symmetric partnership. They can emit statistical information, but not blended data sets. So the sustainability of those partnerships, I worry about. And then on the BEA side, they essentially purchase large sets of private sector data. So what's the sustainability issue there? How long will the budgets of a relatively small federal government agency sustain those kind of costs? So I guess I'm putting my hopes on, we need some legislative changes that respect the privacy of individuals' data, but permit this new data world to happen. That'll be the crucial move, I think.
And then a question for Michelle. So on the Commons data, is that going to be mandatory that all NIH data will be submitted to?
So no, what will be mandatory is that there will be data sharing plans. So right now, data sharing plans are mandatory for if you get 500K or above per year. And the plan is to have those mandatory and scored for all awards. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question.
Who is this guy?
It's sort of two parts. And it's addressed to all of the panelists. And that is an issue that was brought up in Bob's talk on basically retaining and securing public trust through a systematic policy that within the different agencies and nations that we have represented here, that the public can be confident that data that is collected from them is going to be used, reused, reanalyzed, maybe combined with other data in a way where they have some control over that agreement. Currently, there is no there's no system for ensuring that data that's collected either in the private or the public sector will not be reanalyzed. And of course, we have the famous cases that of the ASU case of an Indian tribe having participated in a research project to investigate the high incidence of diabetes, which was later reanalyzed and showed and published evidence that there was high rate of incest in that particular population, which of course was arguably not an unethical use of the data, in the sense that it was collected under one aim and then used under a completely different one for which that population was not an active participant. I know it's an open-ended question, but I'm very interested to see, just from the standpoint of each one of the organizations that's represented here, what kind of policies are possible? How can one work towards retaining public trust in a population where there is admittedly perhaps a lack of understanding, a lack of numeracy, a lack of the confidence that data that's collected from them will be used in an ethical and responsible manner?
Why don't we start with Michelle and come this way?
Okay, so certainly LC issues are incredibly important. We've talked about this from day one within BD2K, and our plan is to have a workshop in the next year on LC and all the things that follow on with NIH workshops.
Might want to tell people what that is, just not everybody knows.
Ethical, legal, social issues. And we at NIH are in the lucky situation of funding research, and so in some ways it's okay that we don't, as a country, know what to do with this yet, because we will fund the research in order to make that the decisions can be built upon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I can share a few perspectives on this question from the UK viewpoint. The first thing to note is that it may not be familiar to people in this room, but a large fiasco in the UK happened over the past 18 months around the sharing of medical records data, or rather the lack thereof. So the UK government rolled out a large program called Share.Data, and the idea is that because of the nationalized health system, there was an awful lot of epidemiological value in sharing health records for research purposes, but it wasn't politically pitched particularly well, and it wound up on the tabloid headlines as after the doctors murdered my gran, they then asked me to take her healthcare records or something like this, right? So it was a political failure. And the arguments in the UK have been that this set back some of these questions of public trust by quite some time. So there's some national context there, and that's probably a warning sign for us here to be careful about building that public trust and taking particular care not to lose it. The second thing I'd like to say is that I have sat on some UK government working groups about this question, not necessarily with regard to medical records, which are maybe one of the most thorny issues, but my experience has been that, at least in the UK, the government is eager to be somewhat out in front, but not too far ahead on the bleeding edge. So in other words, the more comfortable that citizens and consumers become with owning, sharing, controlling, and releasing their data, the more I think governments will come under pressure to take advantage of it. Already in the UK, the census is augmented by other sources of data in ways that are clearly able to cut costs. And if we can work out the methodological questions regarding making those augmentations effective, then obviously there are benefits. And this is probably ready to extend through many branches of government in many different ways. There's also something there about getting out the added value that's inherent in the data. So we were speaking earlier about the administrative data research networks, which are a network of centers in the UK devoted to opening up data for research purposes that's been collected by the government. So I think aside from the Care.Data fiasco that I mentioned, the news from the UK is pretty good. And my experience, I guess, has told me that I think the steps that we really need to take are to inform the public, both as citizens and as consumers, educate them, and then after that, I think the opportunities to realize value from the data that the governments have already collected will follow pretty naturally.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, let me share my perspective from China. Similar to other countries, China is no exception in terms of struggling with this issue of data privacy, and then how to make use of data and then still retain the public trust. But in some aspect, China is different also because the population is generally not as sensitive to the privacy issue as the Western countries. But even though this is changing, this is gaining sort of recognition. So the public in general tend to trust the government more, but the government officials, when I talk to them, they are very sensitive. We don't want to mess around with public data, and then this is legal, there are legal ramifications and so on. And so this is actually becoming an issue more and more so. So what I see currently is that in government sector, there are maybe one branch of government, they have the control of the data. They can sign contract with a particular research organization to have them work on that set of data. Signing basically data protection, privacy, there are clauses that you have to abide to, but the software, the hardware that's developed, they will have different levels of privacy. It depends on how it's used, so who gets to see the results, and so on. That's the level of privacy that so the software and hardware itself will have total access to the data. But the humans, how to interpret data, who actually sees the data and make use of this data, this is strictly controlled. So this is basically, we can tailor this to government's needs and whatever even for this learning analytics project we are doing with the university, I'm speaking on behalf of the Research Institute at the moment. So basically we have full access to that, but the software, the system that we develop, now who actually sees that, whether somebody sees the individual performance, the record of each individual student, his profile or her profile, it's up to the university who has to control. But university is very interested in that because they want to tailor the individualized teaching and the learning activities. That's why you need to access to the individual student's record and so on. So, but everybody is keenly aware of what could go wrong and what might go wrong, and then people are sensitive to that. But at this moment, what I see, there are no laws. I mean, they're talking about there's another interesting effort. Let me just talk a little bit about that. There's talking about national data exchange market. So where people trade data to facilitate data exchange. Now, there has been a lot of discussion on that, how to make that happen. Quality, privacy issues, government legal issues. This is all being heatedly discussed among some of the players at a national level. So I've heard about this, I've been following that, but hasn't been realized yet. But this is very much a difficult issue, like everybody else is struggling with. So
That's my perspective.
Thoughts there?
Yeah, a bunch of scattered thoughts. I think the right word is trust, by the way.
Right.
So we have in this country a variety of pretty strict laws protecting data. So government statistical data, if revealed at a personal level, yields a 5-year prison sentence and a $250,000 fine. So those are pretty tough laws. I don't think they generate trust, though. So the hacking scandals essentially, I think, lead to a public perception that, yeah, you guys are good guys, you're just incompetent.
Yeah.
And that's a problem for us. That's kind of point one. Two, I actually think using the term privacy evokes a huge regulatory framework. And for people in this room, we need to put that on its head. And I think we need to develop a field of data ethics, which might be this century's version of bioethics, right? There was a lot of good work in philosophy and economics about bioethics. And we need a similar movement to turn privacy on its head. A couple other points. I think in any new entities that we're building, the watchword ought to be privacy first. We're a horrible audience for this, right? We want information first and research first, but we have too many obligations to live our lives that way now, and we have to build things where privacy is the first thing we address. I don't believe there's a trade-off between information use and privacy protections, and we need to dispel that.
Yeah. Karen,
Thank
just
you.
a quickie, because we got to get to the lunch event.
Okay. Well,
Now you're literally standing between us and lunch.
yeah. Okay. Well, maybe I'll just sort of toss this out there, and there'll be other chances, or maybe people get a quick comment. Karen Fireman, hi. First of all, I just wanted to quickly say, I think University of Michigan, MIDAS, ARC, and you all are doing an incredible job in a leadership role in bringing big data, collaboration, et cetera, through to all of us and working together. Fantastic. Bob, Tom, Patrick, Michelle, thank you. Sort of a two-part question here. In what ways are your organizations able and willing and interested in working with liaising with corporations? A lot of you have talked a lot about the PhD opportunities, the professor opportunities, international, and a lot of collaboration between universities that typically has not happened. So it's fantastic what you're doing, and it may be in a possibility, obviously in another time frame, of being a little bit specific. And I have a few ideas of where you might start commenting. What do you see as the stumbling blocks? What are the opportunities, and what, because this is sort of a shameless effort on my part to advance my liaison role, what might be some initial steps that we could do together? Sorry, big question, small amount of time.
Yeah. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to speak to this. A large part of my responsibility with the Turing Institute has been to lead on external partnerships. And I think I mentioned this briefly during my talk, but it's sort of not only commercial organizations and industry, but I would also include branches of government and the charitable sector there as well. I know we heard earlier about a joint effort with the Wellcome Trust. So there are often cases where charities can play a role. I think the most challenging, the needle that needs to be threaded to make these types of partnerships work is for them to be scientifically substantive and yet at the same time sufficiently attuned to the needs of the commercial partner. So in one case, we did a large, a £10 million deal with an engineering charity. It was structured as a grant, and we spent a lot of time negotiating the IP rights around what would happen if things came out of it. We've done another slightly hybrid agreement with a large computer manufacturer, and that has some grant-like portions, but also some more commercial pieces for which we've used a commercial subsidiary, which is something that you talked about earlier. And again, it gets especially tricky around IP rights of the individual academics, and also making sure that tech transfer efforts don't collide with existing tech transfer efforts at the university. So
We're laughing
I
at
can
that.
hear you. Yeah. Believe me,
We've been
I've
through that one.
sweated bullets on this one for a long time. And then lastly, I mentioned that we just announced a large partnership with HSBC. If you look, you'll see that Morgan Stanley set up a similar type of institute a couple of years back, and it was structured within US laws for nonprofits. So I think the watchword is to be flexible in terms of structure. So some arrangements are naturally going to be more commercial, some of them are going to be very, very grant-like. And somebody needs to take responsibility for impedance matching with individual academics so that they're able to engage correctly. But at the same time, I think then the last thing you're left with intellectually is the need for senior scientists to really make absolutely sure that it's not just contract research, it's something that's scientifically substantive, but also commercially appreciated. I think data science offers enormous potential for that because the open research questions are so close to the things that people want to do in very practical contexts. But I wouldn't tell you that it's not challenging. I just think the rewards are there if you've got the team and you've got the time to do it. There's a lot of potential there.
Bob, did you want to say just one last thing on the
No.
public-private partnership? I mean, it's
You'll
a
give
new
me,
mechanism.
you'll give me a second. We have, I think, legal problems to solve in this country on having sustainable partnerships. I think there are a lot of examples and interests for short-term relationships. I think the larger problem is bridging the two cultures for a shared building of an institution. That's hard work, but that's the important work, I think.
Yeah, I think that ought to be the final word on this one. Thank you, Karen, for bringing this up. It's just absolutely critical, and I wanted that part in there, Bob, because we've been struggling with all that. These are new mechanisms, and we've got to get out of the box to figure out how to create these in such a way that it's really win-win. So let's thank our panel for a great session.
Well, we care because approximately 300,000 people in the U.S. experience a cardiac arrest, and 90% of them won't make it. So we care. You want a defibrillator next to you. You want someone that understands bystander CPR next to you.